In 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic expecting gold, glory, and submission. But what if the first people he encountered refused to bow? What if Europe's first foothold in the Caribbean was not the beginning of conquest, but the beginning of resistance? Image_shorts_1, a lone Taíno figure seen from behind standing on a tropical beach at sunset, watching strange ships on the horizon, cinematic and mysterious. Image_shorts_2, two scholars entering a limestone cave filled with ancient Taíno petroglyphs, torchlight revealing carved Zemi figures on the walls. Image_shorts_3, a hyper-detailed close-up of a Taíno Zemi idol carved from dark stone, weathered texture, sacred atmosphere, cinematic lighting. We know the history. Columbus arrived in 1492, and his voyage opened the door to a devastating transformation of the Americas. But in this alternate timeline, the Taíno do not greet the newcomers as harmless visitors. They see the danger early. Image_shorts_1, a silhouette of a Taíno warrior standing on a cliff edge, looking toward the sea with a calm but alert expression. Image_shorts_2, close-up of indigenous hands, tracing ancient petroglyphs carved into a cave wall, warm torchlight, cinematic. Image_shorts_3, a close-up of dense vines and jungle leaves, creating a natural wall of protection. This is not history as it happened. This is a world of speculation, a Caribbean where unity, terrain, and survival instinct changed the course of global discovery. Welcome to the Historix Vault. Image_shorts_1, an indigenous-style canoe paddling quietly across calm, moonlit water, seen from behind. Image_shorts_2, two figures standing at the entrance of a dark cave, light spilling from within, ancient mystery atmosphere. Image_shorts_3, an extreme close-up of gold dust and small nuggets glinting in darkness, symbolizing desire and danger. Before 1492, the Caribbean was not an empty paradise waiting to be discovered. It was home to complex island societies, including the Taíno, people who cultivated cassava, built organized communities, traveled by canoe, and lived within networks of trade, kinship, and spiritual tradition. Taíno society was guided by cacique, leaders who oversaw regional communities and maintained alliances across the islands. They were often described as generous and diplomatic, but they were not defenseless. They knew the sea, they knew the forest, and when threatened, they knew how to protect their homes. Then, in October of 1492, something unlike anything they had seen appeared on the horizon. Three strange vessels, towering sails, men in unfamiliar clothing. Columbus and his fleet had reached Guanahani, unknowingly sailing toward an encounter that would reshape not only their world, but ours. On October 12th, Columbus and his men made landfall. In real history, the first meetings were marked by curiosity, exchange, and misunderstanding, soon followed by exploitation. But in this timeline, the Taíno noticed something different from the beginning. The strangers do not simply look at the island, they measure it. The first reports spread from village to village. The newcomers wanted gold, they asked repeated questions, they studied the coastlines. They accepted gifts, then seemed to expect more. Across the islands, leaders began to wonder if these visitors were not guests, but a warning. On Hispaniola, the powerful cacique Caonabo heard the reports with suspicion. He had seen conflict before. He understood that a threat did not always arrive with an army. Sometimes, it arrived smiling, asking questions, and reaching for what was not its own. Taíno scouts began watching the Europeans closely. They saw their steel blades, their crossbows, their hunger for gold. But they also saw their weaknesses. The strangers were few. They moved slowly through the forest. They depended on supplies, fresh water, and local cooperation. The first warning came quickly. A small European foraging party entered the jungle, expecting little resistance. Instead, they found themselves surrounded. Arrows struck the ground around them. Warriors appeared from the trees. No massacre, no surrender, only a message: leave. Columbus first dismissed the confrontation as a misunderstanding. He believed gifts, pressure, and intimidation would restore control. But the Taíno were no longer treating the Europeans as mysterious visitors. They were treating them as a threat. As Columbus attempted to establish a foothold on Hispaniola, the Taíno changed tactics. They avoided open battle. Instead, they disrupted foraging routes, blocked access to fresh water, removed useful materials, and vanished before the Europeans could respond. The island itself became a maze. Taíno and allied leaders understood something Columbus did not. The Europeans' strength was frightening in a direct clash, but their survival depended on routine, supplies, and confidence. Break those, and even steel begins to feel heavy. Soon, the pressure began to show. European morale collapsed under heat, exhaustion, hunger, and constant uncertainty. Every rustle in the jungle sounded like an ambush. Every missing tool felt like sabotage. Every step inland felt like a mistake. Then came a coordinated night raid, not a reckless assault, a precise strike. Supply tents were burned. Stored tools disappeared. The camp was thrown into panic. By sunrise, Columbus understood this was no simple misunderstanding. This was organized resistance. Refusing to admit defeat, Columbus chose force. He ordered a punitive expedition inland, hoping to crush the resistance, seize supplies, and prove that European power could not be challenged. But Taíno had been waiting for exactly that decision. The Taíno chose the ground carefully, a narrow jungle path, steep ravines, thick vines, limited visibility. For the Europeans, it was a route inland. For the Taíno, it was a trap. When the European column entered the passage, the jungle erupted. Arrows, stones, and spears struck from several directions. The formation broke. Commands disappeared beneath confusion. And the men who had come to punish the island suddenly found themselves fighting only to escape it. Oz. But the ambush was only half the plan. Near the coast, the Santa Maria had become damaged and vulnerable. In real history, its wreckage would help form Spain's first settlement in the Americas. In this timeline, the Taíno deny Columbus that chance. Under cover of darkness, a small canoe party reaches the damaged ship, seizes what supplies they can, destroys usable timber, and sets fire to what remains. The materials meant to build a colony become smoke over the bay. The double blow was devastating. The inland expedition had been broken, the ship's remains were lost. The dream of a permanent foothold began to collapse in front of Columbus's eyes. For the first time, the admiral of the ocean sea looked at the island and saw not opportunity, but defeat. The pressure tightened around La Navidad. Without the materials, food, and confidence needed to secure it, the settlement became fragile before it was truly born. The Taíno did not need to destroy it in a single attack. They only needed to make it impossible to hold. Inside the encampment, fear spread faster than any command could control. Food ran low. Water became dangerous to collect. Arguments turned into mutiny. Gold and glory had become hunger and survival. Columbus now faced a choice: stay and risk losing everything, or retreat and return to Spain with a story no monarch wanted to hear, that the people of the Caribbean had resisted him and won. Under cover of darkness, the remaining Europeans abandoned La Navidad. They carried only what they could. Behind them, the failed settlement stood as a warning, not a colony, but a monument to miscalculation. At dawn, Taíno and the allied caciques watched from the cliffs as the two battered ships disappeared into the horizon. For a moment, there was silence. Then the island answered, not with celebration alone, but with the knowledge that the sea would bring others, and next time they would be ready. Columbus's return to Spain was nothing like the triumph history remembers. There were no easy promises of endless gold, no confident vision of helpless islands waiting to be claimed. Instead, he brought news of a fierce, organized people who had turned Europe's first Caribbean foothold into a disaster. The Spanish court hesitated. A second voyage would require more soldiers, more ships, more money, and far greater risk. The Caribbean was no longer imagined as an open gate to empire. It was marked as dangerous waters. Meanwhile, the Taíno did not simply celebrate and return to life as before. They adapted. Coastal watchposts were built. Canoe routes became warning networks. Alliances between islands grew stronger. The victory against Columbus became more than a memory. It became a strategy. But victory did not make the islands invincible. European diseases would still become one of the greatest dangers of contact. Yet, in this timeline, controlled contact, isolation of the sick, and slower European expansion reduced the scale of catastrophe. The Taíno suffered. but they survive in far greater numbers. News of the victories spread across the Caribbean. From island to island, the story traveled. The Sky People could be resisted. Their weapons were frightening, but not magical. Their ships were powerful, but not untouchable. And their hunger for land could be stopped, if met early, together. European exploration did not end. Ambition, trade, religion, and rivalry still pushed ships across the Atlantic. But without an easy Caribbean base, colonization slowed. European powers looked north, south, and around Africa with greater caution. The Age of Empires still came, but it came later, harder, and more contested. Over generations, the Taíno transformed survival into sovereignty. Island communities formed a powerful confederation, controlling harbors, trade routes, and diplomacy. Europeans could still come to trade, but only under Taíno rules. No forts without permission, no settlers without agreement, no gold taken by force. The myth of an empty, easily conquerable new world shattered before it could fully form. In Europe, mapmakers began drawing the Americas differently, not as vacant territory, but as lands filled with organized powers, dangerous alliances, and nations that had already defeated Spain's first attempt. Spain's rise changed as well. Without an early flood of Caribbean wealth, and without an easy route to deeper conquest, its golden age became less overwhelming. England, France, and other rivals still rose, but in a world where indigenous power remained a central force, their paths to empire became slower and less certain. Across the Americas, the effects were enormous. Other indigenous nations had more time to observe, adapt, negotiate, and resist. Some formed alliances. Some adopted foreign tools on their own terms. Some blocked European settlements before they could grow. The continent became a mosaic of native powers, colonial outposts, trade zones, and contested borders. The Columbian Exchange still happened. Crops, animals, ideas, technologies, and diseases still crossed the oceans. But the direction of exchange changed. It was no longer only conquest and extraction. It became negotiation, resistance, adaptation, and controlled contact. A different kind of global world began to emerge. Imagine the map. The Taíno Confederacy, dominating the Caribbean. North America divided among powerful native nations and limited European coastal settlements. South America shaped by stronger indigenous resistance. Europe still ambitious, but no longer unstoppable. This single what-if, the Taíno repelling Columbus, would echo through centuries. It reminds us that history is not shaped only by ships, kings, and empires. Sometimes, it turns on the people standing on the shore, watching the horizon, and deciding that their home will not be taken. History often remembers the ships that arrived, but sometimes, the more powerful story is the shore that refused to surrender. This has been Historix Vault. Subscribe for more alternate histories that ask one question. What if the first ending was not the only one?